Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. Whenever I test lenses, there seem to be two categories that lenses fall into. There are those lenses that are brand new and innovative, just like the Sigma 85mm 1.4 that we took a look at last time, that we'll be looking at again more in the future. But then there are other types of lenses that are just incremental updates of lenses that we have already seen. And that's where we are today. Today we're looking at Nikon's new 70-200 f2.8. Now it has a bunch of new letters behind its name, such as E and FL. What does all this mean? Let's go ahead and take a closer look, shall we? So while this lens may not be a huge, like groundbreaking sort of thing, a 70-200 is the type of lens that is found in pretty much any professional photographer's bag. It doesn't matter if you're doing portraits or if you're doing landscapes or wildlife or sports. I pretty much don't know a professional photographer that doesn't have this lens. Yeah, this is like a staple. So what could you possibly do to this lens to make it better over the original version? Well, of course I say original version. There's been many versions of this lens. This right here is the older 70-200 BR2 that we'll be using as a little bit of comparison. Now, one thing that people were hoping was that this new lens would be significantly lighter in weight. And, whenever I took it out of the box, I thought, okay, I can definitely feel a little bit of a difference in its weight, but I don't know that it's enough to really be significant. A 70-200, of course, I always tell people 70-200 is kind of a small lens overall. Yes, it is a little bit bulky and heavy, but in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of like the smallest pro-level telephoto there is, really. So you get used to the weight. This new one is a little bit lighter thanks to part of its construction, and we'll talk about that. This lens is actually we'll just go through and talk about what all these new letters mean. This one is a 2.8E as opposed to a 2.8G. So the first thing that means is that this lens has an electronic diaphragm as opposed to a mechanical one. Now, on Canon lenses, whenever Canon went to autofocus and changed their mount to the EF mount from the FD mount, they decided to make all of their lenses have an electronic diaphragm. The downside is that meant that all backwards compatibility went out the window. Nikon, they've kind of eased into this. So if we take a look at this older 70-200, the 70-200 BR2, which is a G-type lens. G on Nikon means that we have no aperture ring, but it also means that we still have this mechanical lever here to control our lens diaphragm. Now, what's happened is, well, actually there's two things that have happened. Number one, cameras continue to get faster and faster. So when we have cameras capable of doing 10, 11, 12 frames a second, every time the camera's taking a photograph, it's having to fire the shutter, it's having to flip the mirror, and it's having to physically move this lever. All in 10, 11, 12 frames a second. And it has to get this to a precise amount to be able to actually get you the aperture that you have chosen. Now, that's a lot of stuff to happen in a split second. So basically, as cameras continue to get faster, a lot of times whenever you're shooting a quick burst, sometimes you may end up with a frame that's a little bit too dark or a little bit too bright because the timing of things were a little bit off and we didn't quite get to the desired aperture fast enough. So that's Nikon's number one motivation to going towards this new electronically controlled diaphragm. It's electromagnetically controlled. This is something that we've seen it on other Nikon lenses that we've looked at on this channel, such as Nikon's 300mm f4. I think that was the first lens that we actually looked at with that technology. But Nikon, they have it on a lot of their other lenses too. A lot of the super telephotos, the 16 to 80 2.8, that is the kit lens for the D500. And so it's on a bunch of different lenses. On this one, of course, this one is a Type E lens. So if you actually look at the back of this, it kind of is like looking at a Canon lens, because you notice that, first of all, whenever you look through the lens, it's in the wide open position all the time as opposed to the closed down position all the time. And of course, there is no little mechanical aperture lever thingy anymore. So it's all electronically done, and it's not mechanically done. The other benefit of this is that if you are shooting video, you have much better aperture control there. As you know, not all of Nikon's bodies allow you to be able to change aperture while in live view. A lot of cameras, you have to exit live view and then change the aperture and then go back into live view again. Well, if you have an E-type lens such as this one, it doesn't really matter what body you're using it on. You will be able to change your aperture when you're in live view. And of course, you'll be able to get a little bit smoother aperture adjustment too. So that's what that's all about. We have some other letters to look at. This lens also is an FL lens. This means that basically it has a fluorite lens element. Now, on a lot of Nikon's higher-end super telephotos, such as lenses like the 400 2.8 and 800mm 5.6 and 600mm f4 and so on, Nikon was able to shave off a lot of weight off those lenses. If I remember correctly, they shaved like 2 or 3 pounds off the 400mm 2.8 whenever they went to this technology. A lot of people were really excited about that on this lens. Unfortunately, they didn't really shave that much weight off it. I can't tell you the exact spec right now. I'll probably just pop it up on the screen at this point. But yeah, it's not nearly as much of a weight savings as what we saw on those really big lenses. So when you pick this up, you'll feel a little bit of a difference, but it's not going to be like a huge world-changing difference in weight. So when the older version of this lens, the 7200 VR2 came out, there were several controversial things about it. Number one, a lot of people felt like there was some sort of manufacturing defect because they'd look inside the lens and it appeared as though little pieces were flaking off the internals. And then there was the whole controversy about this lens's hood. You know, a lot of people really hated the shape of it compared to the 7200 VR1's hood. They felt that it was kind of too minimalistic, I guess. But the biggest thing that people were up in arms about on this lens was the fact that it has the so-called focus breathing effect. Whenever this lens came out, they designed it to where it would focus closer than the older version of the lens. So if you're shooting at 200 millimeters, and say you're a portrait photographer like me, or you're a wedding photographer or event photographer or something like that, and you know, you oftentimes photograph subjects far away, but you still like to be able to get the shot when they get closer, you found that this was very useful, or at least I did. However, the downside to this is that if you're shooting at 200 millimeters and you're at the closer focusing distance and not out towards infinity, this lens is no longer an effective 200 millimeters. It ends up being an effectively 135 millimeter lens, and a lot of people were, you know, all fussy and saying, well, you know, I didn't pay Nikon for a 70 to 135. I paid them for a 70 to 200 and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And depending on your use and depending on your style of photography, you may actually find this to be a big thing. I personally never really had much of an issue with this, but, you know, your mileage may vary. Now, I will tell you, on the new version of the lens, that is not something that we have to worry about. That is actually the first thing that I went and tested on this, and I'll show you guys some samples and so forth in the description, and I may even put a little video within this video to show you as well. But basically on this one at 200 millimeters, this lens actually focuses a foot closer than the older version of the lens, but it has very, very little of the focus breathing effect, which is really, really nice. So yeah, if that was an issue for you on the older lens, then you won't have that issue on this lens. Also, you'll notice that this hood is redesigned. So let's see here, let's pop this off. Okay. So you can see this is the new hood versus the hood from the VR2. So it's not quite as deep as the hood on the VR1, but it's definitely more like the VR1 hood as opposed to the VR2 hood. So there you have it. Not much else to say about it. It is just a hood. Actually, I'm going to leave that off for a second. Now, this lens, looking at the specs on paper and so forth and MTF charts and everything, yeah, it is sharper. I've only shot with this just a little bit. The truth of the matter is, I feel like the 70-200 VR2, or heck, even the 70-200 VR1, I feel like that lens is still plenty sharp. This one may be a bit sharper. I don't really think it matters a whole lot at this point. So, yeah, I don't care about that too much. They did redesign the foot as well. Now, this is something that I like quite a bit. You'll notice that there's a couple things that happen with this new foot. Notice that that secondary screw there, or that first screw there by my thumb is much, much further back than on this one. So it sits on a quick release plate much, much better. Yeah, I don't use a tripod very often, but if I do, more than likely it's going to be with a lens like this one. And I noticed this immediately. The other thing is that this foot is a little bit lower profile. So in the past, we had a lot of Nikon lenses where their foot was very, very tall with a very high center of gravity. But now Nikon has decided to go with a much lower profile foot here. So I do like that, even though, to be perfectly honest with you guys, whenever I'm shooting with a 70-200, 90% of the time, my 70-200 is like that anyway. Now, it's not all good news. The number one thing that I do not like about this lens is that they swapped the zoom ring and the focus ring. And I thought about this a lot. I kind of did some testing and to see what I felt and how I held the camera and so forth. And I don't know, there was just something that I found a bit off about this whole configuration. And I've finally figured out what that is. Normally, whenever I'm holding this lens and I am controlling the zoom, I'm holding it in a way like to where I'm like this. And I'm actually using the palm of my hand to kind of support the bottom of the camera as well at the same time as I'm zooming. However, because the zoom ring is now up here, I can't do that. So I'm sure if I shot with this lens a bit more, I would get used to it. But as of this time right now, I do not like this because I just don't like the way it fits in my hand. Now, a 70-200 lens is a lens that's used by a lot of different photographers. And I don't know if I just made this up or if I actually did read it somewhere. But apparently a lot of wildlife and sports photographers that may shoot with the gloves on because they don't want their little hands to get cold. Apparently a lot of them complained that sometimes when they're wearing gloves, I don't know, something got in the way and they felt that the zoom ring up here would be better. Whatever. The 70-200 lens is a lens that's used by a lot of different photographers, so I can respect that. Me, I will absolutely never fall in that scenario, so I can't speak about that. But yeah, I really don't like this reconfiguration of the rings. Over here, we do have these buttons, and these buttons are actually back from the VR1. Now, one thing I noticed about this is that number one, there's just one more of these buttons, whereas on the previous lens, I'm pretty sure on the VR1 there were only 3 of these buttons, and now there are 4. But these can be used basically as a AF on button, or they can be used as a autofocus lock. And so you can see down here, you have that switch for that configuration. You can turn it off, turn it to AEL or AF on. And let's see, then we have our VR modes here. We have off and VR normal and VR sports. It's pretty straightforward. Then we have our focus limiter, and we have the A-M as well as M-A switch position. And that position first showed up on the VR2 actually, because on the VR1 we only had M-A and M. So yeah, everything looks very, very familiar on this lens. The only other subject of controversy with this new 70-200 is its price tag. And I mean, all I can say to that is ouch. I mean, this thing is $27.99 USD. So that is like a $800-900 price increase over the older version. And man, I think when the 70-200 VR2 came out, it was like a $200 or $300 price increase. But wow, come on, Nikon, really? I mean, this thing only has one more element over the previous version, and it has a fluorite element, but I don't know. There's not that much of a difference. It does seem to focus a little faster, but yeah, I mean, that is, I don't know, in my opinion, it's a pretty hefty price to pay for this lens. I will definitely be sticking with my older version for sure, no doubt. Anyways, guys, tell me what you think in the comments below. If I end up taking more samples, I'll probably post those in the comments below, or in the description below as always. But tell me what you think. Are you guys going to actually spend that kind of money on this lens? We should see better performance over the aftermarket versions like the Tamron in terms of focus speed. In terms of image quality, though, I don't see it being like worlds different or anything like that. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I personally would spend the extra money on this. But let me know what you think. As always, be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at PhotogJTheGreat. And let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see on this lens, because I will definitely be doing more testing later on. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.